Nick, speaking of going back to 72, the original mix of The Great Gig in the Sky without Claire Torrey is interesting and odd to hear. How did it sound to you when you played it back?
Well, I'd completely forgotten how we treated it at the time, and interesting because that's again, it's this thing about you have one idea and then you need enough time to develop it and say, well, actually, no, it needs something else on top, and what could we do, and what would be the influences there, and it's, I think the actual, the instructions to Claire at the time were pretty vague, because I think at one point we'd said things like, sort of thinking of very modern music, there's a singer called Kathy Barbarian, who did a lot of sort of Schoenberg style of music, atonal, 12-note rows and so on. And Claire actually sort of took that on board, but then went for something far more melodic, which worked far better. But it could have gone in a million different ways.
And that was, as legend has it, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, perhaps a weekend session. She came in, there was, come on in, the vague description of what we're looking for. She did it, she left, walked away, and without making an issue of this now, she came back years later and thought, that became very successful and I had a lot to do with it, and she ended up getting a writing credit.
Yeah, and maybe fair enough. I mean, I think for a long time there was and probably still is, a bit of a sort of division between the session players who came in and did something for an afternoon and the band who did it full time, if you like. And there was the feeling that the session players were rewarded for and guaranteed to get paid, whereas the band, of course, and many bands still are, still paying off their advances from the record company.
No question.
And maybe never went anywhere. But whether it was a Saturday or a Sunday or a Monday, Tuesday, I'm afraid that has escaped me.
It's a couple of years ago. 1974, I believe, live at Wembley, up-tempo, the sax solo, the jazz groove. It's wonderful to hear Money that way. When you heard it again, what did you think?
Yeah, I was really alarmed. I thought, whoa, Neddy, I thought. What's going on here? It sounded like I was on speed, and absolutely not. It was interesting to hear it. I actually hated it, hearing it at that tempo. I much prefer it pulled back, and I don't know whether we just thought that's the way it should be played, or whether it's just one of those evenings where you just set off at a tempo and think, oh, all right, let's try it like this. What I much preferred was again this sort of return to an R&B feel almost in the fours, in the solos, which I really liked, and I think that was, Money remained for many years one of the songs that, when played live, always had this freedom to just open it up and say, well, no, we're not going to do 3 8-bar solos, we're going to do 14 should the mood take us. And so, from that point of view, it's I'm sort of fond of it, and I like that performance because of as I say, because of that R&B feel in the solos rather than the tempo at the kickoff.
I think Paul Carrick did a great vocal on it years ago with Roger on a tour, and to your point, it breathed and it was open, and it had a little bit of a R&B bounce to it, more than the record would have allowed for. David once said that The Dark Side of the Moon describes the emotions of a lifetime, and amidst the chaos, there's beauty and hope. What kind of stirred in you when you played back tracks from that record?
Well, I think in terms of the writing, certainly in terms of the lyrics, the thing I think is perhaps most interesting about it is that they were written by Roger when he was in his early mid-20s, but they are as relevant and possibly even more relevant to a 50, 60-year-old than they are to that age group. And that, I think, is one of the sort of the most extraordinary aspects of the whole work. That it has, in terms of relevance, it's as relevant now as it was then, and if not more so.
Clearly. The bands that have endured you, the Zeppelins and the Who's and the Rushes and the Stones and the Beatles, the music that's endured, whether the band's together or not, regardless, seem to all have in common the ideology that you make music for you. You hope that people like it, but you're not going to be affected by the trends, the newspapers, the fans. Is that sort of the way you went into it?
Oh yeah, and I think that still holds true. But I think it's that's not because we have a particular musical morality. I think that's because that's the only way we know how to work. I think if you actually are capable of understanding what the public would like, a number of us would probably happily sit down and knock it out. But in the absence of that information, all you can ever do is try and please yourselves, because then you can, at least you know where to go and how to do it.
Instincts are everything, really. I think it was Richard years ago was asked about, it was around the time that Dark Side was clearly a home run. And how long can you keep doing this? That question always seems to come up. But more than the question, the answer was, maybe forever, or maybe we'll get into a fight tomorrow and it'll all be over. Was there that feeling among the whole band, or was he just being silly?
No, I think he was being absolutely correct and philosophical. It's absolutely right, because you have no idea how long it can ever last for, because it can implode or explode. I mean, you can very easily have a situation where you're all getting on brilliantly and you can all live together in a commune, but the public might suddenly decide that actually they don't really like that anymore, and they'd rather do something else. And so there's an element of, well, whether it's luck or fate or whatever, that you have to allow for. There is no guarantee that you will be allowed to continue to perform beyond that next album or whatever it is, let alone whether you've got a couple of lunatics in the band who are going to shoot each other.
Once you reach the summit of Everest, then what is the question? But 1975, another peak in most Floyd fans' opinion, mine included, in the album Wish You Were Here. Tell us about the feelings you had when you heard back tracks. Obviously, we mentioned Wish You Were Here with Stefan Grappelli, but otherwise, Shine On, for instance.
The problem with Wish You Were Here was that it was hard work, and I'm not very good at hard work. It wasn't what I signed up for. I think we were quite, I won't say exhausted, but we were quite tired by the time we were getting to do it, because we'd already had an abortive start with the household objects idea, and we'd sort of lost a year and didn't really, I think we didn't have much idea of where we were going and how we were going to do it, and we were thinking about touring, but we were sort of already getting to the point where we were really almost more involved in the technology of the tour than what we were actually going to play. And I think, so I don't remember a sort of sense, there wasn't a moment, a Dark Side moment, where you finally hear it all and go, yeah, I think that's right, that's good. I think there were odd songs, and there were moments, but they were interspersed with all the weird stuff that went on with Syd arriving in the studio. And the great thing about Syd arriving in the studio is everyone now has a different version of where he came from, how long he was there, how long he stayed, what he did, what he said, all the rest of it. So there's a lot of sort of confusion, I think, would be.
Well, since you're here right now, what is your memory of when Syd showed up during the sessions?
Well, my abiding memory really is the fact that I'd actually been working on some drum part at the time, and I walked back into the studio to see the others there looking a little bit sort of shell-shocked, I suppose, and this funny old bloke between them, and I looked at him and looked away again, because I assumed he was a friend of someone, or I had no idea who it was.
And it was probably common for people to come in and out.
Well, no, it wasn't really. So
No.
There was that slight sense of, well, how on earth, who is this guy? Because no one said,
Okay.
this is so-and-so, or this is a friend, or this is someone we're trying to get rid of.
How long was he there before it came out who he was?
I think about 5-10 minutes,
Okay.
and I think David probably said, "Do you know who that is?" And I went, "No," and he said, "Syd." And so that was a shock, because there was, I more than anyone, the others had seen Syd between 68 and 75. The other three had all worked on one of his his 2 solo records. Roger and Dave had done one, I think.
Rescued him.
Dave and Rick.
Helped
Another,
him out.
Yeah.
Right.
And but I had not set eyes on him as far as I can remember for 5-6 years. So I absolutely was sort of bowled over, really. And that's my real memory. What he actually said, how long he was there, all the rest of it, it's a sort of a mystery, really, and I don't clearly remember that.
Is that feeling when you haven't seen someone in a long time and they've aged dramatically or changed physically?
Yeah.
Do you recall it saddening you, or?
Yes, because he looked 10 years older than the rest of us, I would have said. I mean, I think he was either bald or, I think, bald. I think there's a picture.
Yeah, there is. He is quite bald.
A picture in my book. And that in itself was an interesting thing, because there was quite a lot of discussion about whether we should even include the picture in the book, because it felt a little weird doing
Exploitative
that.
or whatever.
But in the end, it says so much about what was going on and why it was so peculiar that I think it was probably the right thing to do.
I remember, Nick, years ago, someone asked about Syd, as they often did, and I'll ask you. Do you remember the one word? You probably gave a lot of words and descriptions about Syd, but there was one in particular that summed up how he got, which is really why he was out of the band. Started with an I. Impossible. It got to the point where you just couldn't do it anymore with him because he wasn't doing much.
Yeah, and what he was doing was peculiar.
Yeah.
I think in hindsight we should have encouraged him to go earlier, actually, and we kept him on for our own interests, because he was the leader, he was the writer. It would have appeared that it would almost all be over if Syd left. So I think we shut our eyes and pretended that maybe if he had a day off he'd be fine. And the reality was that he was breaking down. To this day, no one knows whether it was to do with drugs or whether he was psychotic anyway or whatever.
Different
but
things
the
affect.
fact of the matter is, he was certainly not happy doing what he was doing, and so we should have made the break earlier and gone on with it.
That takes a lot of courage to oust someone that started the band that you're in.
Absolutely.
If you had one word to describe Roger. There's a lot of words going out of your mind,
I
isn't
don't think
there?
there's a single word, really. I'd say, oldest, dearest friend, and possibly a little more difficult than Stalin.
What about David Gilmour?
Much more reasoned, really. But and I think I don't think it's single words, really, for people who've known for sort of 40-odd years or whatever. And I think the thing with David is that I'm just so grateful that he was capable of just going, when Roger left, of saying, what, let's carry on without him, because actually we did 2 huge tours that I absolutely loved playing on. I mean, for me, they were the best tours, because before that we would always do these sort of silly short tours because we all thought that was a good idea for some reason. Quite why now completely escapes me. But the long tours, of course, are the one way that you actually do start producing better music, because you actually play to the point where you really are rehearsed and familiar with it, and then you can actually develop it. And the same goes for the show, that the show actually develops all the time. It's not that you learn it and then stick with it. You learn it and develop it.
Yeah, there's an evolution, and Division Bell really proved that you guys got deeper into the process as a unit, it must have been, well, it was to all of us, especially Roger, the biggest surprise in all of rock, the fact that you did carry on.
Yeah.
And I wish,
But
even in the absence of Roger, that you would carry on. Are there thoughts in your head about the concrete plans?
No, no concrete plans at all. And I think in many ways what's great is that Roger has had the success with the Wall, because I think, maybe there was an element of frustration there that helps to sort of deal with, really, because I don't think any of us quite understood how we'd created a brand rather than just, it was more than being a band. It was a brand, and that people recognised that and would come and see us on that basis.
And their affinity is unwavering. It programmed a lot of radio stations across Canada over the years, and 9 out of 10 times when we did polls, listener-generated polls, tracks from Wish You Were Here would come in number one as the number one songs, and Floyd is the number one or number two band, period. Carte blanche. So yeah, to your point about a brand, it's a brand that will not die ever.
To just go back to that for a moment, what's
Please.
quite sort of funny about it in a way is that we've all become inured to the fact that we're all still seen as having done each other's work, so that people still congratulate me for the show we did in Berlin, which I had absolutely zero to do with, and I think other people congratulate Roger on seeing him on tour in '87 or whatever. So I think we'll just sort of leave that and just take the credit where we can.
The Cars.
The Cars.
How big a passion is it today?
It's always been there. I mean, the thing with Cars was I was brought up in a motoring family, and my dad raced and so on, and people say which came first. Well, the answer is Cars did, because actually rock and roll was only being invented when I was a small boy. It wasn't there, whereas Cars were. And so what I've been able to do is sort of indulge my sort of wildest dreams in terms of motoring and go racing and hang out with Sterling Moss and all that. So I've had a sort of double whammy on this.
Probably at a different level, but that Jeff Beck's a madman about cars as well. Have you ever crossed paths in?
Oh yeah. No, you tend to know the other people who are into all that. Yeah, he's into stock cars.
Do you have a current obsession in terms of a specific car?
No, it tends to stay the same. I tend to be sort of Ferraris and Ferrari racing cars, and cars that I've been racing now for the last 30-something years, and so it's the cars that I've had the good racing in that are the passion.
Does it get easier or more difficult?
It gets more frightening.
More frightening.
Which is why I now get my children to do it as well. It's much easier.
I appreciate your time. Congratulations on this project.
Pleasure.
Great to meet you, Nick.